Now you're ready to begin your second project. This project, the Political Cartooning Project, will be assessed on a summative basis. In other words, like your coat of arms project, it is worth marks. This project will be assessed out of a total of 20 marks. When you've completed it, please submit the project by dropping it into the Political Cartooning Dropbox that follows. Before we actually begin the project, we need to consider a number of pieces of information. We need to consider 3 specific documents or sources of information. These 3 are found within the lesson file as indicated. Once we've reviewed these 3 pieces of information, we'll have a better idea of how to go about completing the project. So let's get started. The first step towards completing this project is understanding exactly what a political cartoon is. Basically, a political cartoon is a visual commentary in which an individual, a cartoonist, creates a visual, a political cartoon, in order to express an opinion, point of view, or perspective in relation to some important or significant social, political, or economic issue. The cartoonist uses a number of techniques in order to express this opinion, point of view, or perspective. One such technique is called caricature. And this entails exaggerating the features of a person or element within the cartoon. This is done in order to make a point or offer an opinion about the person or element's character, beliefs, or actions. Second technique is called symbolism, or the use of symbols. Symbols are basically physical objects that represent abstract ideas. For example, in a political cartoon, you may see something like the Statue of Liberty being used to represent freedom. A third type of technique is called metaphor. Metaphors are basically comparisons of 2 or more seemingly non-comparable objects or individuals. For example, in a political cartoon, using a tiger to represent a nation in a cartoon where one nation is invading another. A fourth technique is called irony. Irony expresses an idea through a contradiction between something's literal meaning and its intended meaning. For example, in a political cartoon, using a picture of a U.S. president with a crown on his head. The irony being a U.S. president is elected and a crown, symbolizing a king, is not. They're born into the position. A fifth type of technique used by political cartoonists is called sarcasm. Sarcasm is a type of irony. And basically sarcasm is a way of poking fun or making a mockery of an appearance in order to make a point. Another type of political cartooning technique is called hidden element. In this type of technique, a small element, whether it be a person or some other type of thing, is made to be quite small, inconspicuous, but its presence adds something to the message of the political cartoon. A similar type of technique is called contrasting size. In this type of technique, the cartoonist uses vastly different sizes in order to make a point. In other words, characters or elements within the cartoon are very different in size. Another type of political cartooning technique is called stereotyping. Stereotyping is a technique in which a real or imagined trait of an individual is applied to a group. For example, all teenagers are loud. Obviously, stereotyping expresses a bias and can be unfair and harmful, but from the point of view of a cartoonist, it's being done to make a point. not to mock or judge. And finally, ridiculous exaggeration, similar to contrasting size, is an element that uses size to make a point. In this type of technique, action, event, and characters are portrayed in an unrealistic manner, sometimes extremely large, extremely small, so on and so forth. We've looked at some of the various types of techniques: ridiculous exaggeration, stereotyping, contrasting size, hidden element, sarcasm, irony, metaphor, symbolism, and caricature. Now that we've done so, let's actually go about trying to interpret a political cartoon. Let's go about interpreting political cartoons. Let's consider satire. That's another cartooning technique. Satire uses humor to lower something or someone in the reader's or viewer's estimation. It's not meant to be mean-spirited, and its point is not to harm. The main point is to expose human folly and to make room for improvement. Here's an example. In this political cartoon, we see a political cartoonist offering an opinion in relation to human nature. Obviously, there was a disaster of some kind, a natural disaster like a flood. The second disaster, according to the political cartoonist, are all the people stealing items from the area that experienced the disaster. We talked about caricature, and again, that exaggerates one or more features of a person or element in the cartoon. And it's attempting to say something about the person or thing's character, beliefs, actions, and so on as a result of the exaggeration. Here's an example. These individuals, political figures, have their features exaggerated to make a point. However, they are still recognizable, and that's part of the ability of the cartoonist to offer and communicate an opinion, perspective, or point of view. Here's another example. Notice how the ears and face are exaggerated. We talked about symbols. Remember, symbols are physical objects that represent something more abstract. We talked about the example of the Statue of Liberty. Here's another example. Notice in this political cartoon, we see vultures representing things such as looters, criminals. And in the case of the human skeleton, which symbolizes death, we see New Orleans during obviously the disaster of Katrina and its aftermath being symbolized. Here's another example. This is actually the picture of the eye of the storm, no doubt New Orleans, but from above it looks like a skull and crossbones, again symbolizing death. We already talked about a metaphor, and we know what it means. Here's an example. Kobe Bryant, during his previous brushes with the law and accusations of rape, is being compared to a three-ring circus. Here's another example. Same kind of idea. Again, we talked about irony as well. In this political cartoon, irony is being used to make a point. Obviously, this cartoon has to do with Iraq. We see the strewn and dead body of the former dictator, Saddam Hussein, and on top is a statue of a current leader, obviously representing an Islamic republic. Again, what seems to be the case is one dictator is replacing another. Sarcasm. Remember, this is a form of irony. The element that turns irony into sarcasm is basically, again, the appearance of mockery or bitterness. Here's an example. Notice we have a Statue of Liberty, and here's a sarcasm. We have an overweight Statue of Liberty and a lot of fast food. Obviously, the cartoonist is saying something about obesity and Americans. Stereotypes. We talked about this as well. Here's some examples of stereotypes. Here we have a younger man and his mother, obviously dressed as a hippie. Obviously, stereotypes are being made about the woman. But what is the purpose of a political cartoon? Remember, we talked about the fact that it's basically a visual commentary in which the individual, the cartoonist, is attempting to express an opinion, point of view, or perspective. But it also does other things. Basically, a political cartoon exposes one of two gaps. The gap between appearance and reality, and the gap between what is and what could or should be. And basically, the cartoonist and the cartoon attempts to expose hypocrisy, point out silliness or pretentiousness, laugh at arrogance, deflate the powerful, and sometimes give a voice to the underdog. Now that we've actually looked at a number of political cartoons and considered them in relation to specific cartooning techniques, let's look at an actual single political cartoon and break it down and analyze it. Here's an example. Clemenceau, the vampire. Here's the political cartoon. But how do we interpret this? Well, first of all, we have to look at the context. What was happening at the time? Then we need to look at the content. What is happening in the cartoon? And finally, comment. What is the meaning of the cartoon? Let's look at the context. What was happening at the time? Well, Germany had just been defeated in World War I. The Treaty of Versailles was signed in 1919. It had basically been written, the Treaty of Versailles, by the three big powers, and these powers had imposed the treaty on Germany, the three powers being England, France, and the United States. Clemenceau, the Prime Minister of France at the time, supposedly wanted to ruin Germany and basically the treaty blamed Germany for World War I. The treaty also made Germany pay for all the damages in the form of fines or reparations. On top of this, Germany lost a great deal of land. She also lost her armed forces. And obviously, as a result, the Germans hated the treaty. So this is the context. How about the content? Let's look at what is actually happening in the picture. Well, we see a young girl, beautiful, but fairly sick. We see an evil-looking vampire. This vampire is sucking the girl's blood. We see weapons laid aside. We see two bats outside the window. Again, an example of symbolism, or these bats symbolizing more vampires. We also see that the window is open, but the curtains are blowing. So what about the comment? What is the meaning of the picture? Let's look at the poorly girl. That would be Germany. How about the vampire? Well, the vampire symbolizes Clemenceau. Remember, the Prime Minister of France, the President of France at the time of the Treaty of Versailles. The sucking of blood, taking of reparations from Germany. The discarded or weapons laid aside, Germany having to disband its military because of the Treaty of Versailles. And the two bats outside, flying outside the window, Britain and the United States. How about the window being open? Germany being helpless to defend herself, is the symbolism of the window.